immediately slide into the Sewer Utility District Commission, and we'll let the record show that we're all still here. First is approval of the meeting minutes from April 11th. Motion and a second. Any comments or corrections to the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Next up, we have resolutions. Resolution 4053, resolution authorizing staff to file the City of Mequon's Compliance Maintenance Annual Report, otherwise known as the CMAR, for fiscal or calendar year 2022 in accordance with requirements under Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 208.
Move approval.
So motion and a second. Any questions for Mr. Driscoll? Maybe just a 30-second overview on what this is for our new members. Some of us remember this every year, but we got 3 new people who've never seen it before.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Nurbin. Good evening, Commissioners. The item before you is the Compliance Maintenance Annual Report as required by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for a municipality that's operating a sanitary collection system. It outlines maintenance such as inspections of facilities, condition assessments of lift stations, force mains, gravity sewers. In the past, this has included projects that are projected in the future, like the East Trunk Relief Sewer that was completed south of Mequon Road. And it included the Lift Station E replacement project, which is currently underway, along with other capacity improvement projects that are based on areas with historically frequent overflows. And that's based on model efforts in 2022, including the Fieldwood Drive Lift Station G and the Riverdale Park Lift Station F as projects in the future. So in addition to the projects for systematic rehabilitation and capital budget planning, it's to address compliance and avoid sanitary sewer overflows. The report automatically assigns a grade, and Mequon received an A, where in 2022, one of the first years since I've been here, that there were no SSOs reported. So with that, I can open it up to questions.
It's a pretty significant achievement.
Very pleased.
Okay. Any questions from the council? I can't recall what, we have a motion and a second, I believe. Or any comments or questions? If there are none, we can call the roll.
Commissioner Strelchik? Commissioner Tlako? Commissioner Meyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanchard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bach?
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish?
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider?
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt?
Aye.
Commissioner Nurbin?
Aye. That resolution is forwarded on to the council. Next up, we have Resolution 4054, resolution approving an award of a contract to complete inspections of 1,011 sanitary sewer manholes in various locations to the Sigma Group of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the amount not to exceed of $48,496. Maybe a quick overview on this item as well, since there's some money involved.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Nurbin. Yeah, this inspection contract is based on the CMAR requirements for us to maintain the system. So one step is inspecting structures to see if there's any structural issues, operation maintenance issues, and then the next resolution that is before you is to do rehabilitation of manhole structures. So that's what this item is, and the inspection work is based on a 5-year cycle to cover all of the structures in Mequon.
Thank you. Is there a motion, perhaps?
I like to motion approve Resolution 4054.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, please say aye or nay when your name is called. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Strelchek, Commissioner Tlaco, Commissioner Meyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher,
Aye.
Commissioner Bach,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider,
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt,
Aye.
Commissioner Nerben.
Aye. And that moves on to the council as well. Next, Resolution 4055, a resolution approving the award of 2 contracts for the rehabilitation of 79 sanitary manholes with Grout to Great Lakes TV and Seal Incorporated of Green Bay, Wisconsin, in the amount of $70,235, and for the rehabilitation of 37 sanitary manholes with epoxy to Visu Sewer of Pewaukee, Wisconsin, in the amount of $170,566.
Okay, again, this is a rehabilitation contract based on our CMAR and the inspection findings, where the grouting work is to stop the leaks, also known as infiltration, that occurs during wet weather like we currently have, where the elevated river levels can saturate the ground and the water finds the path of least resistance into structures that over time deteriorate, and that can take up capacity in the collection system and lead to overflows. So we grout those leaks and stop the infiltration. The structural component of applying an epoxy coating to the surface increases the longevity of the structures. So those are the 2 contract awards.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Parrish.
Great work, and I'd move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, let's call the roll.
Commissioner Strelchek,
Aye.
Commissioner Tlaco, Commissioner Meyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher,
Aye.
Commissioner Bach,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider,
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt,
Aye.
Commissioner Nerben.
Aye. That too moves on to the council. Next up, we have Resolution 4056, resolution authorizing a sanitary service deferral agreement for the property located at 12204 North Fieldwood Road. Director Lundin, I think, is going to take this one.
I'm just going to offer a bit of history. The background on this parcel is at one point in time, the property owner was seeking a building permit and the holding tank had failed and was otherwise leaking. So as a condition of that building permit, the city and the property owner at the time entered into an agreement whereby the property owner would connect the home to the public sanitary sewer system. Some of the building improvements were made, but the connection to the sanitary sewer was not. The property has since changed hands, and the current property owner is seeking a deferral from that agreement that was made with the previous property owner for the requirement for connection to the public main. The deferral would allow them to seek a permit through Ozaki County for the replacement of the holding tank and maintain a private system while continuing to pay the capital charges for MMSD, which is standard under city deferral agreements. Therefore, if the council tonight is looking to grant the deferral, then you can make a motion to recommend the resolution on to the common council. If you should so decide that you want to maintain the original maintenance agreement for connection to sanitary sewer, then you would recommend denial of the resolution, and we would otherwise uphold the requirement for the property to connect to public sewer.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commissioners? I see some puzzled looks.
I guess
Commissioner,
I did
Schneider.
reach out with an email previously, but I'm a little confused because this structure back in 2015 was a non-conforming structure, like in a flood zone apparently.
It still is.
And at some point it became unoccupied, correct?
Meaning there's no one living there right now?
Yeah.
To my understanding, yes, there is no one living there right now.
So is it still an intact structure?
Is it still an intact structure? I don't know. That's,
Someone in the audience is going no.
yeah, and
It is
And it-
standing. If you mean if has it collapsed, no, it has not collapsed, but
And it may not otherwise matter. The deferral runs with the property. So whether someone is able to bring the existing structure into compliance or whether someone were to raise and build a new structure, the deferral would run with the property. So the property owner is trying to understand the requirements for the property and whether that's connection to the public sanitary sewer or whether that's the allowance of a private system.
yeah, this property's had a troubled past, to say the least. I think the sense I get is the current owner is trying to somehow bring it into compliance. And I think that's generally the goal the city should have, is to bring things into compliance, which if we give them a deferral, they maybe have a cheaper way to bring the whole site into compliance. There's a single family home there now. I think if it were raised, it would not be allowed to be built in the same location again because it's in the floodway. Not all the land on the parcel's in the floodway, but it's
Yeah,
a pretty
sorry.
challenged site. Maybe we should bring that up. But the deferral is a different issue than the other compliance matters on the site. There's a whole host of other building code violations with the building itself. But this item only deals with connecting to the sewer or not connecting to the sewer. Commissioner Bach.
Is it the buyer's responsibility to check on the documents to see that, before you buy this property, that you're required to connect to the sewer based on that, whatever, 2015 or whatever that agreement was, or not,
Well,
or no?
It's in the sewer service area. So the requirement is connection. They regardless of the 2015 deferral, because it's in the sewer service area, they would have to connect to the public system.
So the buyer knew that when they bought the property?
They should, well, I can't speak to that. I don't know. You'd have to ask the buyer.
Yeah, the requirement's really the same. They're in the sewer service area. There's no sewer service there today because there is no functioning facility. So the default is connection. They're asking for a deferral, which has happened in other areas where it's geographically, it's not impossible to service this, but it's 575 feet away from the nearest sewer service, and the policy says if it's greater than 200 feet, they can apply for a deferral. So they're applying. Commissioner Parrish.
I was a little puzzled by this one too. I guess my first question is, it sounds like other properties would be granted the deferral because it's greater than 200. Just another property that's greater than 200 feet today applying would probably get it. Whereas we're trying to hold the new homeowner, because it runs with the land, responsible for kind of an old policy where maybe we didn't have that policy. So they signed in.
No, it's always been, it's in the sewer service area. So that's always the requirement.
But the deferral agreement,
We do have, well.
it's a reason for
any
deferral.
property owner can seek a deferral. So yes, there are other property owners in the area that have deferrals, including all of River Club Estates subdivision. So yes, there are other properties
Okay.
in the area that have seeked and received deferrals, as there are in many other areas of the city.
Okay, and it's not on city water, right? Or it is? Okay. Yeah, I may have more questions.
Yeah, I think our policy was the same back in 2015. They could have applied for a deferral. They didn't.
And let's be clear, in 2015, when this was going through, it was an emergency. I mean, the holding tank was leaking, the facility was occupied, and they were looking to make improvements to the building near immediately. And we can't really issue a building permit when there's not proper sanitary services on site. So a condition of the issuance of the building permit was the sanitary sewer connection, so that they could move forward with some of the building improvements that they needed to do while working through the sanitary connection. They just made the building improvements and never made the sanitary connection.
Commissioner Strelchak.
I've got a little background on this property. I've actually been in the facility. Back again with the holding tank that failed. That was an issue. The owner at the time was holding out because the discussion with Weichert and his property was that he would have to have sanitary sewer, and that would have gone past his property and he could have connected. So that's why he explained to me personally. I'm not debating this. This isn't a two-way discussion on that portion of my conversation with him. He shared that he was waiting to apply because he was going to try to hook up to sanitary sewer as that subdivision came in, and he didn't do it. My understanding is that he built, this facility. There's several things that aren't in compliance. My concern as a council member is that there was an agreement in place. None of that ended up happening. The bottom floor on it, in my understanding, if you've been in it recently, is in a state of disrepair, and it wouldn't pass code currently. Is that correct? Has anybody been in the facility? Okay.
It's been a couple of years. We were out. When Paul Larner was the chief inspector, he was out. It was just before he departed, and that's been 3 years now, I think.
And at that time, it wouldn't have been compliant?
Correct. There were numerous code violations in existence at that time.
Kim Tollefson and I had talked about this property. There were several different statements to come into compliance. There was a lot of frustration with city staff and the occupant, and back and forth discussions to get this property within compliance. I know this is sewer, so I'm just preempting a little of this discussion because I know if we say yes here, it goes to council. If it does get approved by this group here today to be recommended to council, I would recommend several things in which we make sure the property is in complete compliance before approving this. That they do their due diligence on the holding tank if at all, or go through the city process and work with city staff to get the site within as close of compliance as city staff and or planning commission and or whoever else has to agree that that's an acceptable use. Or we simply just deny this, at this point.
That creates a chicken and egg problem. No one's going to invest in bringing the whole facility up to code and everything without working sewer facilities.
Right.
They're not going to spend a dime on that until they know they can serve it with some sort of.
It would be an
sewer treatment
approval
facility.
contingent upon meeting city code compliance. They wouldn't be approved for any type of occupancy.
Well, we're not approving occupancy here. That's the problem.
We would require the county sanitary permit before the building permit would be issued.
Okay. So that's where your expertise comes in. I'm hesitant on this one. I hate to see a building be torn down because it's not in compliance. But I'm hesitant on approving this or recommending this.
Isn't the flip side of what Alderman Strelchak just said, approving the deferral, but subject to them bringing it into code compliance within like 180 days or something? Would that be a good solution? Like give them a time frame to bring it into compliance if we grant the deferral?
Yeah, you end up in a circumstance where they're unable to meet compliance for some reason, and then they lose the deferral, but they could have used the deferral as Director Lundin indicated with a new structure that they built on site that may be in compliance. I'm not sure that's the best approach. It probably creates more problems than solutions.
What would you recommend?
I think quite honestly, it's either you grant the approval or not. Is my position on it. I think a lot of the discussions about the previous owner this and the previous owner that, none of that matters. He lost it. It was through a sheriff's sale. We've now gone through 2 subsequent owners, I think maybe 3, that have been in contact with our respective departments Each time they, acquire the property, hey, what do we need to do, to do this? The question really is do you want to grant a deferral for this property to allow it to be potentially used in some way, or are you going to require the connection as required by our policy otherwise? It's the same question, quite honestly, that we have every time we deal with one of these is, do you want to grant the deferral, or do you want to force them to connect, which is the default?
I think practically speaking, all the other history of the property aside, you've got a dilapidated, blighted structure with many, many code issues. Do you think you're better off forcing them to connect and run 575 feet of private sewer line, or granting them a deferral to make it more possible to do something on that site to bring the rest of it into compliance? There's no guarantee that they'll follow through on their word, just like Mr. Tucker didn't follow through on his word. But you could put maybe a time limit on the deferral. If they don't do anything for X number of months, and I don't think 180 days is enough. There's so many issues with that building. I'm not sure that 180 days would be enough to get contractors in and out of there to fix it all. More likely they're going to end up tearing it down, but they still have to have sewer service if they're going to have a single family home there. So Commissioner Strelchak.
I think for me, the dividing line is if this was a property 500 feet away that wasn't doing improvements with the condition that they'd have to connect to sewer back when an agreement was made with the city for the addition to the building. The addition was done and the connection to the sewer never happened. That was the agreement. I'm leaning towards sticking to my guns on that agreement versus, letting somebody do something different. If it was an existing home whose septic failed and they couldn't get another septic and they needed to put in a holding, and in order to stay in their home, they needed that, I would say yes. I would agree that would be the case, but that's not the case here today.
I'd have to ask the city attorney to weigh in on the legality of judging the situation, whether it's occupied or not. I think we might be in trouble there. So if the attorney has an opinion on that, I think we've run into similar instances before where...
In what way are you thinking?
Well, I just heard someone would make a motion to do one thing if it was occupied by an owner that was in trouble now versus someone who just owns the property and doesn't live there.
And wasn't doing an addition.
Yeah,
Addition is my driving factor here, and that was the agreement that was made.
They still have to take the rest of the site into compliance to occupy it.
Yeah, I guess
that's not what we're voting on tonight. We're only voting on the deferral. That's why it's yes. They won't get occupancy on it if they don't fix the rest of the code items. This is just one of a plethora of code items. It's probably the biggest one, not having sewer services. But Alderman Meyer, Commissioner Meyer, sorry.
First of all, I'm surprised that the current investor, the current owner, that didn't do his due diligence in checking it. That's the first thing kind of pops up. But second of all, we granted this, taking away all the individuals inside of that, we granted this deferral in the past for it. And I think by not granting it this time, we're like punishing the current owner because we already had that deferral beforehand for good reasons to do that. Subsequently, whether or not the people followed through with that, the agreement beforehand, I don't have anything to do with the current owner inside of that. Letter stated to the fact that he assures us that it will get done, and in order for anybody to do any type of investment in that property at all or to bring it up to code, they're going to need to have this deferral, and we granted it before. There's no reason why we shouldn't be granting it now for them, and I'll be voting in favor of that.
The city attorney was going to speak before I ceded the floor to Commissioner Meyer.
That's all right. So I think to answer the mayor's question, yeah, I do. Obviously, you're right that there are concerns about making distinctions between owner-occupied versus an investor or a non-resident type circumstance. You do have those concerns. With that said, and I think Alderman Strelchuk kind of jumped in and corrected it nonetheless, but certainly, as I heard Alderman Strelchuk's comments, I don't think that's his intent. I think it was based on other factors, maybe just inelegantly stated.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion, or is there a motion? Is there a second?
I'd make a motion to deny.
A motion and a second to deny. I would ask everyone to think about the property that's there and whether the odds of it getting cleaned up and brought into compliance are better off with a denial or with an approval. I think that you would, if you considered it carefully, you would probably find that the odds of it being brought into compliance are much greater if there's a deferral. Otherwise, we'll have a blighted structure there forever because no one's going to spend a dime to fix that up if they need to spend the money to run a sewer line to 575 feet. I'm just throwing that out there. If our goal is compliance, we should probably vote in a direction that will achieve compliance.
Can you put,
I think that's the question was, what is the process to obtain compliance? And I think anyone from city staff can answer that.
Only speak to that there was a previous order to correct or summary of non-compliance issued, and it would be at least those items, but I can't speak to whether that's current with
So
the current condition.
I think last we know there was what, 2 or 3 pages of violations on the property that needed to get cleared up. This is but one of them. Who knows how they'll choose to rectify the other ones? It might involve tearing the building down. They could certainly try to chase the other ones around one at a time, but that's they're not going to do anything. I don't think if they can get sewer. That's my personal opinion. Commissioner Parrish, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to vote no to I'm not going to not deny it, and then assuming it doesn't pass, I would make another. You may withdraw. But my motion would probably be to grant the deferral, provided they come into compliance within a year, and if they've made no effort to come into a compliance and they come and ask us for another extension, we're obviously going to say no. But if they're working their butts off, then we would probably. So.
I mean, to the extent that I think there are or is a desire to see, hey, can they actually accomplish bringing this into compliance, whether it's tearing the existing thing down and building a new something, or to try to do something with the building as it currently exists, in light of the fact that at the end of the day, it does run with the land. You run into problems the longer you delay that because it creates uncertainty, and nobody's going to spend the money if it's not a for sure thing at some point. My recommendation would be the way that we would typically deal with if we had a municipal citation, for example, in this type of circumstance. You give them a short period of time, maybe 60 days in this case, to say, okay, bring us the plan, whatever that is. Fix the structure. Here's how we're going to fix the structure. Here's the plans for the new house. Whatever that looks like, and to then, grant the deferral once you have that specific plan in place. that would be your best chance at realistically getting that done. Now, I'm not saying that the property owner here is going to agree to that, because obviously, for example, if he's going to tear down the existing house and build a new one, he may not want to spend the money to do architectural plans to come up with the new design and everything else if he doesn't know that he's going to get the deferral for sure. But that would be about the only way I can think of that you could coax him down that approach.
Do we table then for 60 days? Is that what that looks like?
Functionally, if I were someone investing in that property, I wouldn't spend a dime if there was.
Yeah, but yeah,
Depends on how much of a detailed plan you're talking about. I mean, it could be as simple as bullet points and dates by which they plan to accomplish it, and that could be done relatively quickly. But
I mean, the owner might not even know how much it's going to cost to make those repairs, right? The owner might
They
come
may that.
back and say, "Hey, it's not. I'm not going to make these repairs. I'm going to tear it down." Well, then, if that was the case, then I would be saying, "All right, well,
could be
then
wrong, but my personal read on this is they're trying to figure out if they want to mess with it based off of this vote.
So you could say, "Hey, come up with come up with the plan." And then, give you what is your plan for this property, and then talk about the deferral.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you could put why don't we, I like the idea of a deadline, but I think the ask has to be pretty simple. Provide us your plan and your general timeline. And if we're satisfied with that plan, then we can let it stick with the property. If we're not, we can have them come back and present here and at such time when he can ask for it again. Does that satisfy?
So there, I guess I have two questions. One is whether or not this body wants to see the plan before taking action. Certainly an option would be we would grant the deferral contingent upon staff reviewing a plan that satisfies staff's desire to do that, and then not have it come back, or you could have it come back to this body. Would be, I guess, question one. Second one really isn't a question, but more of just a statement, just based on experience. You're going to want something more than just here's my time frame to get it. I mean, you're going to want probably cost estimates, time for whatever particular repair that's going to be associated with it, from somebody in the industry to do it, because otherwise you're going to get somebody that's just going to say, oh well, I gotta raise the basement 6 feet to make it flood proof, and that'll be $20 and it'll take me a week and a half to do it. It's just not realistic. So you want to incentivize them to make sure that they're coming in with legitimate, detailed cost plans and timing to do that, not just we're going to do this in 6 months kind of a thing.
Commissioner Tlaco.
I have a couple concerns. One is what they plan to use the building for. It was my understanding that they were going to try and possibly turn it into like an Airbnb, so it wouldn't even necessarily be for like family use. The other issue with the debate of whether to grant this or deny this is that it is a non-conforming house. It's been vacated. We have a city ordinance stating that the city then can take over this building after 12 months of non-occupancy. As far as the non-conforming, we've held everyone else upon the river to these standards, and to make an exception, I think we need to either go one way or the other when dealing with non-conforming houses. You can't treat people closer to the river one way and then treat this house an additional way. So I don't feel like there's enough information to really...
I don't think we're treating these people any differently. There's many people near the river that have deferrals to have holding tanks, and the rest of the structure, we have been holding them accountable. That's part of the reason it ended up in a sheriff's sale. Yeah. Yep. In fact, yeah, we're treating this one just like everyone else, and that's part of how they got here. Commissioner Strelchak.
So my question is, It's a question, not a comment. Following up with what the mayor said, I don't want to make a decision here or at council that's going to have the neighbors of Villita Park and the river and Friedstadt and Fieldwood looking at basically an abandoned building, asking why city council didn't do something about that. So I'm trying to prevent that from happening in considering removing my motion. The other side of things is that it's a non-compliant property. There's several different violations that didn't allow it to be inhabitable before, in addition to the fact that the holding tank wasn't there in working order, or it was required to be hooked up to city sewer. And I want to hold to that standard. So being torn, city attorney, is there a way I can craft a slightly different motion that accomplishes both of those goals? Can we limit it to the dwelling as it stands currently? Because my understanding is that it runs with the land, correct?
Correct. I was just going to offer that the deferral is recorded against the property. Just as a reminder, the deferral is exactly that. So if public sewer was ever run down here in the future, they would be compelled to connect, just as they are in all of our other deferral agreements that we otherwise have. And all I was also going to offer is that the dozens of phone calls that we've gotten for this property, they're looking for the conclusion. Is the property required to connect to the public sewer, or will they be allowed to replace the holding tank? So as it relates to consideration of tabling, regardless of how many times this property may continue to change hands, or whether it's this building or another building, they're looking for the conclusion as to whether it would be on a holding tank or on public sewer.
Back in the day, they thought that figure was about 125 to 150,000. Do we have an estimate as to what that might be?
I do not. The property owner provided one, but I think to the point of all of this, it kind of depends on what exactly they're looking to do. I think the figure that was provided was high for what would essentially be a grinder pump and a force main to get into that manhole, but I've not priced it out to speak to it, and unfortunately, we are seeing high rates from contractors these days, even ourselves, so that may be a valid price if they otherwise request.
So what is that valid price that was tossed out there? Just
Their estimate was
$300,000.
$300,000 versus $20,000 for a holding tank. Now, could it be overstated? Sure, but it's probably close to 200. If it was 150,000 back in 2015 dollars, prices have gone up considerably.
Well, as I say, I mean, certainly part of that goes back to the question that I posed, which is, does this body want to see the end result, or are you okay with a staff determination that something's okay? If the intent would be to have staff bless some plan, then it would be a motion to conditionally approve the deferral request, conditioned upon the property owner submitting a detailed cost and time plan for bringing the property into compliance from a building code perspective before the deferral would actually be officially granted, and to put Ms. Tollefson, 60 days, you think, for a plan?
The problem with that is that there would be no building permit without the holding tank.
No, we're not talking about building
asking for a
permits. This
plan.
is just the plan to get the work done. So I'm going to come in, and one of the things is the house needs to be flood-proof. That's the one that's in my head. There's a time that's associated with that. There's a cost that's associated with that. identify what that is, how are you going to accomplish it, get it done. The floorboards, I think, was another one, that there's holes in the first floor that you can see into the basement. What is the cost to get that done? What is the time frame to get that done? Have all of those identified. I think 60 days personally would be enough to get that accomplished, and then have staff approve that plan, at which point the deferral would be formally issued. And if they don't do it within the 60 days, then they just don't get the deferral.
Unless I'm wrong, or I think all of our goal is to make sure this turns into a compliant single-family home structure. However they plan to do it, I would probably donate it to the fire department. Be the most expedient way. But that's just me.
So
Is that indeed our goal, just by show of hands? Is that our goal, is a compliant single-family home structure on this site? It's zoned for residential, so it'd be consistent with its zoning. We just want all the violations cleaned up so it's a compliant single-family home. Is that our goal? Does everyone agree? I think everyone's agreeing.
I think
Okay.
that's, and I like the city attorney's wording of that, because I think if you grant the deferral, there's no guarantee that these improvements are going to be made anyway. So you might think that they might get it done, but I think if you just say yes, there's no guarantee. It could still sit there.
Well, and to
Good,
be
yeah.
clear, though, certainly under the motion that I've just proposed, we could approve a plan and they could still not do anything to do with it. It could continue to sit there and be a problem, but
Commissioner Gebhardt, would you be okay if I withdrew my motion? And would you possibly do the same? And then if I made a motion that mirrored exactly what Attorney Sajak said? Because that was a long motion.
So I struggle with a couple of things here. I've been a little bit quiet and just letting this percolate a little bit, but I struggle with the fact that you've got an owner that bought an existing property with conditions. Okay, and those conditions follow that property. Whether he knew it or not, it was his responsibility to do the due diligence. The second piece that I heard, which I didn't see in the write-up, is that this was purchased at a discount. So I don't think it's unreasonable for them to go through some additional efforts and trying to go ahead and figure out what their plan is to fix up the rest of the issues, because one without the other doesn't get us to an end goal. And if we allow them to put in a holding tank at $20,000 or whatever that cost is, then I think it should be conditional upon some of the other issues with that property. And I struggle with how we get there. So if there is a way to compromise there, I'm open to that suggestion.
Attorney Sajak's statement seemed to address the other conditions with the property by having staff review and accept a plan. They very easily could say that's just too much, they don't want to review it. It could come back to us or it could come back to council, either way. They've done that in the past if they've been uncomfortable and they don't agree with the property owner as to what needs to be done. But I think at that level it does state that they have to have a plan. I'm okay going 90 days on a plan. You know, nothing's granted. They're not sitting with anything granted. To give them an extra month, that would be the only thing that I would adjust. So at this point, I'd like to remove my motion from the table. I agree with you 100%. The property owner did purchase a property that was in a condition that wasn't inhabitable. However, I think at some point in time, I agree with what the mayor said. We have to address a way to get that property into compliance and have it be, not an abandoned structure, which it is sitting at currently.
What we've been doing since 2015 hasn't been getting the result we're desiring, so.
Yeah.
Director Lundin.
Sorry for the table talk. City attorney, I'm concerned that the deferral is the wrong tool here for the condition. So what if they otherwise decided that the deferral was granted, that the actual holding tank agreement was contingent upon all of this? Because that would at least give the property owner the answer that it can have a private system, but it doesn't give
Well, the advantage to that, I'm kind of liking that. It settles the issue of public sewer or holding tank forever. And we did check with the county today. They would permit it.
And that's actually what made me think of it, was the county followed up to say, if the deferral is granted, please have the property owner execute the holding tank agreement.
So it's not like the county wouldn't permit it based off of where it's located. The county would normally permit it. So we're not asking the county to do anything it wouldn't otherwise do. But then we can,
But that way the answer to private versus public is answered, but again, it doesn't give the property owner the right to be able to move forward until that holding tank agreement is executed, and that can be contingent upon the plan or plans or whatever.
and if the plan's not credible, then they never get the permit.
Correct, but at least the answer for all future property owners as it relates to
And they may sell it to someone who has a more credible plan to fix it up. But at least that's not holding the property back. I suspect this has probably been holding the property back from getting cleaned up sooner. Because it hasn't just changed hands once, it's changed hands at least 2 or 3 times.
There's a for sale sign on it again,
Yeah, I noticed the realty sign changed again.
about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that it's still in a floodplain. So maybe that has an impact as to why it continues to change hands and why they
That's
aren't
certainly not
sticking
helping
more
it.
investment into that.
This is a challenged site that's gonna cost a lot of money to get into compliance regardless. I'm sure that an extra $100,000 or $200,000 of sewering cost is making it impossible. I mean, you just can't, the site's not big enough to put a big enough house on it to make that investment ever pay off. It's just not gonna happen. And we'll be staring at that structure for a couple more years and probably have to issue a raise order, and then we'll end up having to do it and charge it back. It's gonna get ugly. So, I'd rather see the whole site taken care of, and I think this is our best path towards getting compliance overall, but I could be wrong. Nothing guaranteed. Commissioner Parrish.
Regardless, why can't it sunset after like 12 months or 24 months if they haven't done anything? I don't get that. Like, why can't we pull the deferral?
Because I guess it's recorded against the property, and that
So we'll
we'd have
record
to-
something new, you know? They didn't
Well,
meet and that's also, because it was recorded, the buyer should have seen that.
I think that's a fair question. Why would it change based off of this guy doing it or not? If this guy doesn't follow through and doesn't do anything, he'll sell it to someone who can maybe more easily do it.
And at least then the deferral is recorded against the property, so then everybody has the question answered. Or not, I guess, either. Because many of us might think that this was part of the due diligence that would be done before purchasing the property, but we've fielded dozens of phone calls, maybe it was prompted by the new real estate sign, if that's what otherwise went out, with people asking this exact question: can I make improvements while I'm holding tank? And that's what's before you tonight, is the answer to that question. Can improvements be made to the property with it being on a holding tank? Or is there requirement to connect to public sewer? So for any property owner from now until forever forward, or until we have sanitary sewer down the road, is can they be served on a private system, or are they required to connect to the public system? The deferral allows them the private system. The denial of the deferral would require them to continue to connect to the public system. And certainly one of the, to answer the first part of the question, one of the concerns that you always have where you're talking about real substantive property rights at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we're talking about. If you grant a right to do something and you can just revoke it, that's where you get claims that you're doing regulatory takings, you know, that you got to buy my house now effectively because of that. And, you know, can you do things to try to minimize those types of arguments? You know, you record 1 million documents against the title that
make it clear that here's your drop deadline, all of those things. But you never know what the future holds and who's going to buy it, and whether or not the court is going to be particularly susceptible to their sob story when they get there. It's not granting rights and then taking away rights is just not a good idea ever, and certainly not in this case, I don't think.
Commissioner Delaco.
So my understanding is that if the deferral is granted and we allow the holding system tank to be installed, that would allow the current owner then to make improvements. However, there would not be occupancy given until those improvements were undertaken and inspected. So that would allow the property not to be an eyesore, for it to be able to get fixed while also following in line with the rest of everything that needs to be taken. Is that correct?
I think that's generally correct. I think it's more likely that they're looking to get sewer to serve it with a holding tank to see if they're even willing to put any improvements in it. Why would you put a penny in that if you didn't want to spend the money to be on the public sewer system, which we can debate the cost of it, but it's well in excess of the cost of a holding tank. I don't know that you'd put a single penny into the rest of the structure to clean it up until you knew one way or the other on that. At least I wouldn't. I would wait to see how this played out and decide if I'm going to dump it and run or continue to go. Commissioner Hancher.
Well, why don't we just make it a clean cut, either yes or no on the deferral? Why go through all this other complication? Just make it either yes or no on it. And then if you make it the deferral and they do nothing with it, then the next owner, if they sell it, at least they know what they have and what they can or cannot do. It just makes it a clean cut.
Commissioner Meyer.
I mean, if we turn this down, aren't we just going against our own code of ordinance? I mean, it clearly just states.
Well, it says if they're more than 200 feet, they can apply for a deferral. It doesn't say we have to give it, but we have tended to grant them more often than not when they're excessively far away from the service. So it doesn't say they're automatically granted. It says that they can ask for it.
Well, it just says a holding tank shall be allowed to replace a failing septic or mound system, reasonable alternative.
I think that's the only reasonable alternative. Probably the attorneys to the interpretation of that, but a direct connection to the public sewer is a reasonable alternative. It's not a cheap one. It may not be a financially feasible one, but it is reasonable.
So,
No, but you got that one right.
But it does say legally possible and practical, and the cost factor inside it doesn't make it practical.
Practical, I think, means. Yeah. They don't want to mention cost in there, but I read the 200-foot limit as a rough measure of cost.
At the end of the day, I don't want people looking at a blighted property. I want to give this owner a chance. I'm going to remove my motion from the table. I'm going to make a secondary motion that mirrors exactly what the city attorney said. Do we want to change the words from deferral to holding tank permit? And I would like to make it 90 days. Do you need to rephrase that one more time, or can we effectively go back on the tape and
Well, I think if you wanted to adopt the concept that Director Lundin suggested, the motion would be a motion to grant the deferral, but that action on any application for a holding tank permit agreement, any action on the holding tank agreement would be stayed until such time as the property owner provided the aforementioned plans. And if you want to say 90 days, then say 90 days.
and if it doesn't happen within 90 days, Do we need to state if they don't provide it in 90 days?
Well, under the approach Director Lundin has suggested, that the deferral is always granted. We just will not act on a request to enter into the holding tank agreement until somebody gets us a plan, whether it's the current owner, the next owner, 3 owners from now, whoever it is. They can always come in and say, hey, here's the plan, give me my holding tank agreement, and we'll say, okay, if it makes sense.
You almost don't need to put a time
So,
limit on
so the 90 days is irrelevant at this point.
Well, yeah. I think Alderman Strel, or Commissioner Strelchak got it. The time limit's almost irrelevant under that construct because it still gives us the feedback mechanism with staff, but they can choose to do it at any time because they can't do anything until they provide the plan because they won't get the agreement, so they won't get the permit from the county.
Right, that's my motion.
I would second the motion.
It's an ugly one, but it works. Yeah, Brian.
Probably not a
you
bad
got
suggestion.
Okay, so removing the timeline. So that's the motion, removing the timeline, but requiring that city staff review and make sure that the plans
Right. Simply
meet city code.
Simply stated, the motion is to approve the deferral, but to withhold action on any application for a holding tank agreement until such time as the property owner prepares and provides staff a plan to bring the property into compliance building code-wise.
That.
Perfect.
I would second the motion.
A motion and a second. Any further conversation? Seeing and hearing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Strelchak,
Aye.
Commissioner Chalaco,
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher,
Aye.
Commissioner Bach,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider,
Aye.
Commissioner Giphart,
Aye.
Commissioner Nurbin.
Aye. That brings us to the end of the Sewer Utility District Commission. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, let's reconvene in 5 minutes. Give everyone a little bit of a break.